Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Intimate Conversations, EMV's interview series where we have a chance to talk about the music with our artists that are coming either to the season or to the summer festival. Today, I'm really delighted to be able to welcome, thanks to the internet, three guests that are spread out all over the world. First of all, I know that most of you will know these guests, but for some of you who are new to early music, I have from Britain, from Bath in England, Charles Daniels, tenor.
Hello.
Thank you. And from Bologna, American cornetto player Bruce Dickey, who is living in Italy, so from his home. And near me here in Vancouver, Alexander Weimann, keyboardist and conductor. Hello, Alex.
Hi.
And I'm also sitting in Vancouver. And we're here today to talk about the wonderful, wonderful piece, the Monteverdi Vespers, that we're presenting on August 1st at the Chan Center as part of the summer festival this year. So I just thought we should start maybe by just setting the tone about this piece, the Monteverdi Vespers, that he wrote in Mantua. There's a few things about whether this was an audition for a better job that he was trying to get out of Mantua. He wrote it on the heels of Orfeo, really, his big, huge success, and for some people, the first opera. So I'm just wondering, does anybody have anything to say about, let's say, the story? I mean, he was working for the Duke of Mantua. We know that he was trying to perhaps leave Mantua. Does anybody want to share a little bit of story of how this piece might have been an audition piece?
Well, there seems to have been a Roman connection, as far as I understand the matter. And I think it might have been for two generations, because he was not only applying on his own behalf, but I think, if I'm correct, he was trying to get his son, or one of his sons, into a position in the seminary there. But as calling cards go, it must be about one of the most glorious things that one could possibly create. Because as well as these wonderful Vespers, there is, in a slightly more, at that time, traditional style, a full mass setting as well, which is also a very good piece. So we have these wonderful pieces. I suppose if you put the whole thing together, you've got like 3 hours of music, something like that. This was all being sent down to Rome. Alex, you may have more to add to this. Bruce, you almost certainly do. Come in. You can shoot me down in flames, or back up what I say. Or anyway, try something.
Yeah, I would just like to say one thing. I think it's important to put this in the right context, which is that even though we think of the Monteverdi Vespers as a piece of music, as a piece, it isn't really a unified piece like, say, the Mozart Requiem or something like that. It's a collection of music for various liturgical functions. And I think it's fine that we think of this a logical liturgical assembly of these pieces into a Marian Vespers, and think of that as a piece. But what I think has happened a little bit to this music is that since it is almost certainly the best sacred music of this period, most important, the most gorgeous music of this type, it gets performed incredibly more often than any other music from this period.
True.
And so I can speak to that very well as a cornetto player, because as a cornetto player, you don't play any other music from this period anywhere near as often as the Monteverdi Vespers. And so I've observed this over 50 years, how this piece has taken on a kind of monumental quality that I don't think was part of Monteverdi's intent. It's become a concert piece, let me say that. Wonderful as it is, I don't mean to take anything away from its beauty or quality, but I think just to put it in context and not think of it as a unified piece of music is important.
It became that.
It became that, as Bruce said, it's just those are parts of a publication, right? And meant to serve as a box that people would serve themselves out of. And the fact that it's not probably meant to be performed in its entirety already is displayed by the fact that the forces, the complements are very, very different for each of those pieces. Some are very small, some are huge, and it would make much more sense to have a Vespers that uses 6 singers and X instruments, and not 2 singers for one piece and 10 for the other, and 3 cornetos only for 1 or 2 simple movements, and so on. However, it gives the skeleton of the Vespers, so the 5 psalms that we need, some sort of anthem-like monodic material between, and then of course the second half, all the stuff that's related to Mary, so the hymn, the sonata sopra Santa Maria. So that's a piece in itself that is very innovative. Of course, it's while it's standing on a tradition, it's still something totally new. And to me, I don't know how you guys feel about that, but to me that is something that keeps fascinating me about that piece is that the audacity of the composer, you know, in that task that he was given. Okay, here is the old, the Gregorian chant and all of that. Here's the new. Now make something out of it. I think in this, he just comes to solutions and ideas that a normal mortal would just never come up with, if they make sense. It's just so way more daring and inventive and free than I could ever imagine.
I want to speak about some of those movements that you mentioned, but wouldn't that actually just point out to the fact that if he was thinking of using it as a piece to get hired in Rome or in Venice eventually, that he would have potentially not written a piece that would be so practical, like with 6 singers, but wanted to show the breadth of his talent and his abilities, and then throw everything in it, basically the kitchen sink, you know.
Yeah, I agree, but I
looks
think
like
it's
that to me.
also, I think also this idea that the diversity is a problem for performance. It's more our problem than it was for any court or large musical institution like a church that in the 17th century. They had no problem with that. They had all the forces there, and they just call upon them when they're needed.
And might it have been performed, you know, certain movements only at certain times before it became what we do today?
Oh, I think in every possible combination. Probably the least likely is that it would have been performed all of the psalms and all of the solo pieces together. But I would imagine a chapel master would just use whatever psalms he needed for his service and maybe compose some of his own, put them in.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the version we're doing in 2024 on August 1st here in Vancouver. And maybe just talk about the fact that, I mean, for some people, it might be interesting to know that there won't be a large choir on stage, but rather soloists, singers, 10 singers, and a really interesting instrumentarium, of course, that Monteverdi specifies in this piece. So maybe can you say something, Alex, perhaps, or any of you, because Charles, you've sung this piece probably more often than anyone I know, about, you know, this 1-to-a-part version using 8 or 10 singers, depending, and what does it bring, and are we missing out on anything by not having a big chorus on stage? You know, let's discuss this a bit.
I mean, it does cut both ways. I suppose the one thing is it probably won't be quite as loud as if you had, well, certainly if you had to say a professional chorus of 75, then it's going to be X times louder. But what you gain that seems to me the gain is hugely greater than loss, is clarity. You gain the sort of benefits you get in any chamber ensemble for musicians who value what each other does, that sort of intimate music making. I mean, Monteverdi's writing, the way the parts interact with each other, instruments against voices, as well as instruments and voices amongst themselves. There's a wonderful complexity there, and it seems to me that's much best served by just having one person on that particular part. Now, we've got an interesting textural variety here as well, because in some movements we have more instrumental filling than in others, and that actually provides lots and lots of lovely color. But I love the single voice thing, because it seems to me that there's an awful lot of sonority. That wonderful Nisi Dominus with 10 vocal parts, that's the heaviest texture we get, and it's pretty sonorous with 10 singers. I mean, but I suppose you could just hear it from a bit further away if you had 100 singers, but I can't see why it would actually be any better. It would just be louder. And I'd rather be able to hear, I mean, as somebody who sings in a middle line of things, and I spent, well, my voice broke more than 50 years ago now, so I've spent a long time doing this. I love the middle of textures. So you quite often in about the same range as something like a viola or a trombone. And so enjoying what those people are doing, as well as what fellow singers in all those other middle ranges are doing. It's hugely satisfying for me as a performer. And I hope that these interactions bring the audience something special as well, because there's lots of clever stuff going on, which shouldn't be the tail wagging the dog, but hopefully it makes it more interesting and vital to listen to.
I wonder if Alex and Charles agree with me, but I always think of this point that Andrew Parrott has often made, that we have this idea of a choir, which comes to us from the 19th century, really, where the choir is the principal protagonist in a piece. And then you have little solo sections where soloists stand up and make their little interventions. But it was really the other way around in the 17th century, that the soloists were the principal protagonists. And then there were sections in which they were joined by ripieno singers. You can call it a choir if you like, but it wasn't a huge choir. It was maybe 2 or 3 to a part. And if you look through this Monteverdi 1610 Vespers and try to find where are the appropriate sections for ripieno, there isn't that much really, because so much of it is written solistically, with lots of ornaments and virtuoso passaggi. So I don't think we're missing very much by not having ripieno.
Yes, I'm right, Bruce, I agree. And also I think Andrew's broader point about solo singing in choirs is well taken, and seems to have been the case. I mean, it applies well here, but it's equally true in England at this era and right through to, I suppose Handel starts to use choirs, but certainly Purcell, it's mostly the solo singers would also be with the ensemble. It works in Germany. I've no reason, I've a little while since I've done so much of the sort of Lalande era repertoire, but it can perfectly well work there, though I think they may have had a bit more filling in the Royal Court. But taking Europe as a whole and this sort of figural music, it seems to be the norm. Well, it works. It varies slightly from place to place as to when you start getting larger ensembles, but Bach is the great Andrew Parrott example. I'm completely with him that that's the rule rather than the exception. It doesn't mean that in any way choirs should be discouraged from singing these things. It's just that what actually happened in the first place was what Bruce has just been saying.
Yeah, very well said. What about the doubling of parts, Alex? Because we have so many colors, of course, with the instrumentarium of the Vespers, and I think your interest in that in this particular performance. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, adding the instruments that Monteverdi, at least for part of the collection, asks for, and then in other pieces he's less specific about it. But using the instruments, that's actually the weapon of my choice. So instead of doubling the singers or quadrupling them, I find it more interesting to add to that core of one singer to a part, one string player to a part, or one wind player to a part, or a broken concert of those, or all of them, depending on the words, essentially. And I think that creates enough volume and sound and variety in the sound. So yeah, I don't think we'll miss anything. I just mentioned that in the first psalm, Dixit Dominus, Monteverdi offers little instrumental interplays between the lines of the psalm, which can be left out if you don't have instruments. He even gives the option in the publication: you can use the instruments if you have them, don't use them, and find a different solution, different complement if you don't have additional instruments. But I asked for, and luckily we received 6 instruments on each side, so 6 string players and 6 wind players, to realize even the fullest double choir pieces.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's of course a huge range of possibilities in adding instruments, colla voce as we call it, so with the singer in unison.
But I think it's worth considering. Lost my earphone just a moment.
While Bruce retreats, even just also to say that we are hugely blessed that the instrumental players are also incredibly sensitive to vocal text and the way they play their instruments. It complements rather than fights what we as singers are doing, and that's marvelous to work with.
What I was going to say is that I think we have to consider that if you had more instruments doubling in the voices and more voices and ripieno voices, the kind of forces that you end up with would not fit in any performance spaces where this music would have been performed in the 17th century.
Yeah.
You know, we're used to seeing this thing that looks like an orchestra and a choir on the stage or in front of the altar in a church, but musicians and singers always performed up in the balconies and choir lofts. And those spaces are limited in size. I mean, they often had a lot of lofts. So you could have a wind group in one loft and a string group in another, and solo singers in another on the organ loft, perhaps, and then ripieno singers at a distance from them. But always adding forces meant creating new spatial dimensions, singing and playing from different places. It was very much looked down upon to have the instruments doubling voices than to have them close to each other. The doublers should be as far as possible from the people they're doubling.
Yeah.
So it's just also a practical thing as far as our performance spaces are concerned.
It's a very important element to notice, because of course it also affects the numbers that we've been talking about. Now we're going to perform it in the Chan Center here. I guess we'll have to be a little bit creative about spacing to recreate something perhaps of distance, but just basically one side and the other side, I think, is probably the maximum we can do there. Anyway, just one small word, since it was mentioned by Charles and Has. It's so important to say that the instrumentalists that are coming to this performance are just about the best in the world, really coming from all over, so that the audience will be treated to a very, very high quality of playing there, as well as with the 10 singers that we have. So we are hiring soloists, doing this 1-2 apart with the people who can really take it on. I think sometimes if you have less experienced people, you might want to have the ripieno choir, but we really do not need in any way extra people on stage with this team. So I don't know, I just thought, I mean, we touched a little bit on the fact that there's so many different styles in this piece, from monody to big anthems and hymns, but there's, like Alex said, there's also this Sonata Sancta Maria, which is incredibly innovative writing. And then there's, you know, a little bit of plagiat, or retaking things, basically the opening of the Vespers, that Monteverdi obviously had huge success with the opening of Orfeo a few years before, and rejigs it and adds the voices to it. And it's one of the most exciting starts of a piece. It's just absolutely mind-blowing. Is there any other, I mean, I wanted to ask Charles about a movement in particular, which is the opposite of that opening, pretty much, which is Nigra Sum. And perhaps you could tell us a little bit about that piece, which to me also might be related to Orfeo, in the sense that, you know, he's just written Orfeo, and Nigra Sum is this incredible florid piece for tenor. So
it is indeed very florid, and it's also very personal. I mean, it actually has two people speaking, really. You have the woman saying, "I am this beautiful, dark-skinned daughter of Jerusalem," but you also have the king saying, "Arise, my love." But it's two people in a chamber. It's very, very intimate. And so on the one hand, you have two people talking to each other. On the other hand, you have this sort of filigree writing, which is illustrative of the various words. I'm just opening up the score here, which after Dix, doesn't it? Here we go. There we go. And of course, the accompanying forces are simply the continuo. There's no obligato instrument. So it's one tenor voice. And I think he's chosen a middle range to be able to be both, to convey the idea of a woman with not too high a voice and a man with not too low a voice. You have to have both of these things. And the king says, "Arise, my love," but he also says all these beautiful things about the winter going away, and the rain is going, and the flowers are appearing, and all these things. There are already ornamental aspects, but it's for the singer to embellish those further as seems appropriate. Again, I talked earlier about tails not wagging dogs. One wants, any ornamentation needs to be in the service of making the text speak more effectively, rather than just being some fancy notes. So that's, I'm going to be singing this piece like that. What I will try to convey to everybody. And in fact, the last set of words is repeated a second time, the bit about the flowers and the winter going away. So you get a chance, the music is not quite the same. It's very slightly different the second time, but again, it invites slightly greater floridity in the approach.
Well, I've heard Charles sing it many times, and I've never heard him sing it twice in the same way. So we'll be very...
The entire piece.
Yes. Could I say something about the Sonata Sopra Sancta Maria? Because
yes,
I think...
Yes, you can. I'm just going to say first, we're going to listen to a little bit of Nigra Sum, and as soon as it's over, we're going to the sonata.
Sure.
surge amica, surge amica mea, surge, surge ed iam in extrait, in habit et flores apparet ut in terra nostra.
Okay, so that was a little bit of Nigra Sum sung by Charles Daniels. And indeed, I was going to ask Bruce to say something about the sonata when the instruments have a chance to shine.
Well, there are a lot of things in the Monteverdi Vespers that people think Monteverdi invented. And one of them is some of the vocal ornamentation, the sort of thing you hear in Audi Caelum with the repeated note, tremoli and groppi and things. But of course, he didn't invent that. He just uses them better than anybody else did. And the same thing with the Sonata Sopra Sancta Maria, because there was a tradition of sonatas on, sonata con voce, where you have a group of instruments and one voice singing a cantus firmus, and it was very often this same text that and same melody that Monteverdi uses. So I can think of 4 or 5 sonate sopra Sancta Maria using this cantus firmus, but Monteverdi's is just so much better that you can't imagine. That's the thing. So the instruments are used in an extremely creative way. That they have florid parts that are quite challenging, and the way the cantus firmus is set is extremely clever. It has breaks in it that you don't expect. It has interesting rhythmic variants, and it's just so clever and so creative all the way through. And it's quite a substantial piece for a sonata sopra Sancta Maria. None of the others come anywhere near it in length or in quality.
That's amazing. And all that with the soprano line always being the same, except for the breaks and rhythmic breaks in it. But
the other thing I think about it is that, Monteverdi really didn't write for the cornetto very much. There's very little. There's this music from the Vespers, and there's Orfeo, and there's nothing else. He didn't seem to like the cornetto very much. He felt that wind instruments were best for maritime themes, and that stringed instruments were better for expressive music. So this is an exception. This is where we wind players get our Monteverdi fix.
But let's not forget that he was a string player first and foremost himself. That's fine. But what I love about what you both said about these pieces, these 2 pieces, is I know how often you've performed this piece, and the love with which you still speak about them says so much. The care and the excitement about doing it again. I mean, that says a lot about this piece and Monteverdi's writing. Alex, what are your special favorite moments in the piece, or the overall arc of the piece? Probably so many.
No, that's impossible to answer for me. Really, my favorite moment is the entire piece, or if it were an entire piece, but all bars, all of it. But for me, just listening to Bruce talking about the sonata, where he made the point, it's not an invention as such, but his use of the vocabulary that was open to everybody at his time is just the novelty. And that reminds me of, Suzie, what you said earlier about some people thinking of Orfeo as the first opera and not Peri or Caccini's Euridice. And I think one detail shows that in both the other operas, it's also the librettist, obviously, but the prologue is given to Tragedia, I believe, and in Orfeo it's La Musica. And also the way he organizes just a sequence of strophic verses, all with the same rhyme and meter and all of that. But the way he treats it musically, that makes the difference. And it's a little bit the same in the sonata, as Bruce said. It's just magnificent. The spiritual and mental power, you know, of that composition is just overwhelming. Yeah, no, I don't have a favorite moment.
No, it's too difficult. I have as a singer when I'm in the piece, if I may join you guys, I don't know, but every time we start the hymn to the Ave Maristella, Hail, Star of the Sea, I really just, it's like I'm transported, I'm levitating every time that piece begins. And another moment where I pretty much have tears coming out is the Et Misericordia in the Magnificat. And I don't know why, those are not the brilliant movements, but they are very spiritual moments. And I really, so much to look forward to, of course. I want to take just a tiny moment to step away from the Vespers for 1 second, because we're talking about the language that Monteverdi is living in, the language of the creative minds that are making the new music and still writing some of the old music style. And that we have a concert a few days before on July 30th, which is a concert that Bruce is putting together and that Charles is singing in and that Alex is playing in honor of Giovanni Gabrielli, whose connection to Monteverdi is clear, of course, because Monteverdi got the position at St. Mark's partly because Gabrielli passed away, perhaps. So I'm just wondering, I feel that this is such a beautiful concert to have as the opening of the festival, and that somehow leads people a little bit to some of the Venetian writing in the Vespers. So I just want to see if Bruce has a few ideas or thoughts to share about this beautiful program together.
Yeah, well, as a cornetto player, this generation before Monteverdi, the generation of Giovanni Gabrielli, is really our natural home. It's the generation in which the cornetto reached its highest level of development, and the writing for the cornetto was most beautiful and idiomatic. Now, having said that, this is a very small scale concert. We have only 4 instruments and 2 voices. So we can't really give an idea of the magnificence of the music of Giovanni Gabrielli. So what I wanted to do was take him as a point of departure and show how his influence, especially in Germany, but not only, but through his students and admirers and followers, how that traced a path through the 17th century. So we actually leave Venice quite early because we don't have that many pieces we can play with the forces we have. And we move on to Schütz and Schein and Scheidt, who wrote smaller scale music, which owes a lot to Gabrielli, but also to Monteverdi. So that's the idea, to show, as an homage to Giovanni Gabrielli through the music of his followers and students and admirers. And one of them, probably the most important one in that sense, Heinrich Schütz, wrote these words in the preface to one of his collections: "O immortal gods, how great a man," speaking of Giovanni Gabrielli, his teacher, at his death. So that's the thread that binds this together and binds it to Monteverdi as well as Gabrielli.
Yeah, thank you for that. I just wanted to mention that because I think it's a wonderful way for people who perhaps know the Monteverdi Vespers, but don't know the other music that is slightly connected to it, and a wonderful way to get introduced to some of the instruments in a chamber music way before hearing them again in the Vespers. Yes, Charles?
Great program that Bruce has put together. I'm looking
Yes,
forward to it.
absolutely, absolutely. So I really hope people will come to both of those concerts, our big 17th century highlights. Is there anything else that, I mean, I have the three of you here. You have played and sung the Vespers many, many times in so many different arrangements and venues in the world. Is there anything else that you want to add about what people will experience and what mindset they should come, or anything at all?
Well, I'd like to add one thing about what I think I will experience, which is that, you know, as a cornet player, you play this piece more often than anyone else, because there aren't as many of us as there are singers and string players and so I have performed this music somewhere more than 700 times. I lost track, between 600 and 700. And I have to say, frankly, this is over 50 years, of course. I have to say, frankly, that 10 years ago, or even maybe 6 years ago, I would have said, oh, I'm getting a little bit tired of this Monteverdi Vespers routine, because you play it in all kinds of ensembles and all kinds of settings, and some very good, some not very good. And the music always holds up, I have to say, even with some pretty subpar ensembles. I still enjoy some of it. But I haven't been performing the Monteverdi Vespers since the pandemic. And now we have this wonderful performance coming up. And I'm really looking forward to coming back to the Monteverdi Vespers in a wonderful setting and just sort of basking in the piece that has sustained me spiritually and financially over my entire career.
It's absolutely beautiful. And we haven't heard it in Vancouver since the pandemic, and I think a few years before even. So it's extremely exciting for people here to know that we're finally going to hear it this summer. Anyone else? Charles, Alex?
Well, I mean, it is, for those who are not used to it, it is a different sound world. I mean, it's a tiny thing, but the fact that we're in a particular old temperament means that the consonant chords have a special sonorous quality to them, which later equal temperament loses to a degree. So you'll find that there's a sort of actually a genuine physical resonance. You'll sort of feel it through the floorboards sometimes. I think just open your ears and just bask in it. I think it's such a wonderful musical world. Completely take up on board what everybody has said about the extraordinary quality of the writing. I mean, there's, to take another little relatively small scale example, there's in the Magnificat, there's one single verse where you have a single voice who just does a very slowly spun out line of cantus firmus, but there's a sort of instrumental concerto going on in the background, which is wonderful. So the singers who we like to be the sort of the big stars, but we're actually just that little thread of thought, and there's all this wonderful stuff weaving around us, and we're definitely the bit players here, but it's an absolutely wonderful moment. So listen out for that. That's kind of about something over 3/4 of the way through.
Thank you, Charles. Alex, final words.
Hopefully not. Well, as Bruce said, it's we meant to perform it in 2020, I believe. EMB did, and then the COVID came. So it's the return on track, and for me personally, it's the first time that I could realize something that I wanted to do for a very long time, decades almost, and which is to create an edition for that piece. It's not that we wouldn't need it, but it's a little bit of a fun fact, but when it was published at his time, it was not published in score version, so not what we would expect a composition like that to come upon us. It's just a series of part books, and without going into too many details, but with that comes a certain liberty for the composer to write for the single part, which means he can add note values without any respect to bar lines, as we would now in a modern score. And as a result, the melody, as it were, that the singer sees in front of them is, I'm not sure whether the words help, but to me it feels more tuneful, a little less subdivided, a little more like chant. And I believe, and I try to preserve that quality in the new edition, and I believe, for me at least, looking at it, it makes a little bit of a difference. So yeah, it's an experiment, and I hope it will work out.
I'm sure it will. I didn't know that it was meant to happen in 2020. Of course, I wasn't here yet.
Yeah.
And I'll just tell you a funny story. When people call the office of Early Music Vancouver, if you get put on hold, you hear the opening of the Monteverdi Vespers. And so I hear it a lot, calling the office or whatever. And every time I'm like, when am I going to program this thing? So it finally happened. But I mean, it was in my ear, like an earworm all the time.
Well, I'm so happy it's not Vivaldi Four Seasons.
You wouldn't have a role in that one, Bruce, sadly.
Well, apart from that.
But anyway, that's just a funny story. But I want to thank you all for your time this morning and for your wonderful, wonderful words about the Vespers and all that we've learned about the whole context of the music of Vespers and that time in Italy. So thank you. We cannot wait to be sitting at the Chan. I know for myself, I can't wait to be sitting there waiting for those first notes and for Charles's voice to ring out with the Deus in adiutorum meum.
Looking forward to it hugely.
Looking forward to August 1st. Don't forget, everybody who's listening, August 1st at the Chan Center at 7:30, the Monteverdi Vespers. 2 days before, on July 30th, the concert in honor of Giovanni Gabrielli with Bruce at the helm. And of course, we have Alex at the helm of the Monteverdi Vespers. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Susie. Thanks all.